音の神の律ねは今日最後とよ思いけんおっぱ上表相手におらず源氏の大将黒義経にこそ組み合わんでは言えよ義経
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to a podcast exploring faith and fear, what scares us and what saves us. This is The Fear of God.
Konnichiwa! Watashi no namae Nesan desu. Tsujo watashi to ishou ni iru no wa Readin desu ga, kare wa sandaru o tsukada nakereba narimasen deshita. That's all I got, y'all. So, welcome to the show. Here at The Fear of God, we explore the holy and the horrific, dissecting what scares us in order to find what saves us and potentially offend whole swaths of people in one fell swoop. Speaking to you right now, as I just mentioned, if you didn't pick up on it, is Nathan. I'll let you kind of Google translate what Reed was doing, but I'm sure he'll tell us when we get back, because I guarantee he knows exactly what I just said. While he's gone, though, and until he gets back, if you have not done so, one of you lovely people out there just today left a review for which we are grateful. It was lovely. We'll post that very soon. So if you've not done so, write a review. Leave a rating if you're not real confident in them writing skills. Subscribe to the podcast. We'd love to know you're out there. Do us a favor. We've got a brand new shirt design, brand new merch design in the old merch shop. Thank you, Jacob Hunt, where you can get a shirt or a campaign button for Franken/Stein 2020. That's very exciting. So we got a whole lot going on, and hey buddy, hey Reed, you're here.
Domo arigato. No, that's not right.
It's right.
Mine Mr. Roboto.
I know. I got it, Mr. Roboto.
Well, yes,
I did.
Mm-hmm.
Do itashimashite. So
what'd you call me?
I said do itashimashite. That's my response to your arigato. Reed, we are shedding listeners right now as we speak. So much for constant listener.
For the 15 that are still with us. So Nathan actually did take some legitimized. Yeah, it was authentic Japanese.
It was authentic.
In what was it? High school, college, high school.
It was high school. 3 years.
3 years. Of Japanese. Yeah.
And I would like to take a moment to thank Google Translate for the translation, but I would like to thank my 3 years in high school for the pronunciation.
For the ability
It has been. I graduated in the late 90s.
Oh boy.
That's been a long time.
Yeah.
It's really fun.
What?
One of the few things I was disheartened about in going to the college you and I shared.
Yeah.
Other than just the scandal that
exited
us out the door.
Basically.
If you remember. Right. Other than that. But going there was that they did not offer Japanese. And I remember this really great moment, my first semester freshman year, because where we went actually had a decent international community, if you recall.
I do remember.
And there were these 2 Japanese students outside of our dorm, and I, the large, not Japanese guy.
Oh.
As I was passing them by, I said, "Excuse me," in Japanese, and they both lit up, and they were flabbergasted and flummoxed.
And then they just began to rattle off entire sentences to you that you were like, whoa.
Whoa. That's all I remember was just, that's really about it. It was just like
what I love about
I'm worried we're tiptoeing up to just insensitivity, so we should just, steer. But yes, I did take 3 years of high school.
Yeah. See,
Japanese.
I took 3 years of Spanish in high school, and I know hola and
that one doesn't really get you any points though.
It doesn't. I know, trabajo, that I work.
Oh, okay.
So
but you're here. Hey, do you know what? Do you know what I said you were doing?
Well, no, I don't, because I didn't take 3 years of Japanese in high school.
Well, in your defense, I wouldn't have known how to say what I said that you were doing with 3 years of Japanese in high school. No, I said you were finishing making some sandals.
Oh, I was making some sandals? Wow. Yeah. How culturally sophisticated of me.
Well, it's also a direct. It is. There's also a direct reference to the movie.
It is.
Unfortunately, after you made your sandals, some troubling things befell you.
Sure. I wonder if listeners pick up on that all of these little opening bits have something to do with the movie. 3 years in
now.
No, of course I'm not for
real.
Oh. Way to take the bait, Nathan.
I took it.
Like, are you for real?
I'm swimming. I'm like, come on, Reed. We got smart listeners. I don't know. They're not all like me, okay?
Wow. Oh, man. Well,
as in they're smart. That was a compliment to our listeners.
Exactly. Well, you know what? I do love our listeners. You know what else I love?
What?
I love the 70s. I do. I do.
You need like TV guideposts. You need when you're introing the I Love the 70s segments this and next week.
Yeah.
Because then the following week is when it starts to lay in some Bee Gees. Okay. I want you to.
I will do that. Dude,
please
I
do
have.
It.
But see, you're specifically probably referencing
sure
like the disco era Bee Gees and not like the,
the
soulful R&B.
Why are you gonna assume that I'm just targeting a very specific era of Bee Gees.
Do you know Bee Gees from the R&B
era? I
don't.
Because
they're amazing.
No, I don't. But you assumed that I naturally wouldn't. And I don't like. Yeah. Actually, most of my fun Bee Gees connotations these days has to do with Justin Timberlake and Jimmy Fallon on SNL. Have you ever watched those?
No.
It is hysterical.
Oh, I'll have to check that out.
You should watch the Justin Timberlake, Jimmy Fallon, Bee Gees talk shows that they did.
Really?
Okay. It's hysterical.
All right.
Yes,
all right.
Absolutely.
I'll check it out. I don't know if you knew this, but I am actively a Bee Gees fan.
There are so few things you could say. The sentence, I don't know if you knew this about me, and whatever followed would not be a surprise. Just
Stop it. No, I love the Bee Gees, man.
I believe you. You don't have to I'm not gonna
stay alive.
I wasn't gonna test your credentials here. I believe you.
Oh, it's so great. But no, sincerely, I do love the 70s. And not only do I love the 70s, I love that we are getting ready to count down the listener-voted top 50 favorite horror films from the 1970s. So we have one more week, next week, of hashtag Speaking in Tongues Phase 1. Stay tuned. But we have one more week of that. And then in October, as has been our recent tradition, we will be counting down your favorite horror films from the 1970s with some episodes from, at least a couple of episodes from your top 10. But as has not been the case with prior decades when we've done this, we actually have already covered quite a bit of the iconic horror films from the 70s. So your votes as they are coming in, it is looking like, unless there's some dramatic shifts in the next couple of weeks, it's looking like we are going to have already covered most of your top 10. But there are some great films still left to cover, and we are going to be covering them in the month of October. So you have one more week, ladies and gentlemen. One more week. Next week we'll close the voting on hashtag I Love the 70s. So check out Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, find the survey, cast your votes if you have not already. Time is running out. We have the list kind of already tallied, but you still have time to make your impact. So vote for hashtag I Love the 70s, and we will see you in October. I'm very excited about that. Very, very excited.
That is very exciting, Reed. I'm just jazzed to hear the Bee Gees back you up when this finally hits the air.
That is happening every single time. That is.
I would actually believe you are clearly so excited about this possibility that I would actually believe that between now and when this airs, you would record yourself singing a Bee Gees song to lay in over.
Oh no! You just did it! You just did it!
Wow!
Oh, boy.
Somebody
That's
had a good day today.
I can't hit those notes though, man. Like those guys are legit. Like they've got some pipes.
Gosh,
and-
I wish you need to, between now and our next episode, watch the Fallon Timberlake SNL bit. It's
Okay.
so funny.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that. But in the meantime, we have a lot to get to. So
We do have a lot to get to.
So-
I did want to piggyback on that. We've referenced this a couple times. We are getting into the thick. This will air latter part of September.
Mhm.
I know it's still slightly early, especially if you are of Canadian descent. But comfort in the creepy. Let's start seeing it. I've been trying to get folks posting.
Yeah,
I think the
I've
only
seen
one
it.
I've got so far is Vera's mug. She's got an
Yeah.
Addams Family mug. So
Yeah.
thank you, Vera, for posting that. I'm sure they will start pouring in, and we'll start enjoying that.
I'm
But
so excited.
what's amazing, Reed?
What?
Did you? I think I sent you a video today, but I don't know if you watched it yet. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Our almost 3-year-old has just been introduced to The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh, does she
And
like it?
Yeah, I mean, she watches it. She's not scared of it. She loves
Okay.
Jack. She will gutturally declare, "I, Jack the Pumpkin King." It's really
Ooh, that's awesome.
amazing.
That's
yeah,
awesome.
and when you kind of like with other characters' catchphrases, when you ask her, "What does Jack say?" she says, "What's this?" It's really amazing.
Oh, that's so
It's
cute.
really amazing.
That's
Yes.
adorable and wonderful.
So everyone post your pictures, Comfort in the Creepy, tag us, and we will repost them. We got a lot to get to, Reed. There's a whole lot. And if you don't mind, I think we should start with a journey back to the small German mountain town, forest town. At what point does a topography determine what type of town it is? Of Winden in Germany, a festering wound, as its denizens tend to call it. Today we'll be discussing episodes 7 and 8 of Season 1, that of Crossroads, and As You Sow, So Shall You Reap, which finds the plot continuing to thicken and boil over into whole new vistas of chronological chaos. Today on TV Guideposts. Do you like that?
Oh, it was beautiful.
Chronological chaos. That's pretty good, huh?
That's-
They just came up with that.
That was
moment.
really, yes, it was very, very impressive. I'm proud of you. Okay.
Thank you.
So,
yeah, here we
so
are, man.
these-
So Reed, there's a lot, dude. These
Man.
2 episodes. What's really funny? See, I'm tripping over my words right now. Like, I feel like Ulrich in 1953. Speaking of Ulrich in 1953, I honestly kind of forgot that happened. Like, if you go back and listen
Really?
to the
Okay.
early, I mean, it didn't surprise me that it happened. But as you and I have been discussing the series, I just wasn't remembering that was forthcoming. But even that's getting ahead of ourselves a little
I
bit.
gotcha.
So
Yeah.
episode 7 is Crossroads.
Man.
Give me some thoughts here. What's
So-
happening here?
So here's one thing about it. So we are listeners. If you've not picked up on this, or if you've not heard about this, we are fully covering thematics and some of the big broad ideas that this TV series deals with in next week's full coverage. So a lot of my notes basically revolve around, just still plot connections, little revelations. So the thing that I liked about episode 7 opened right away with that boy in the bunker, which we later learn is Helge Doppler, and he is...
Episode 7 starts there?
Yes, that is the opening of episode Crossroads, the opening shot of that. And so, we see that he, I wrote, this is my exact note. I wrote, he apparently is an original victim of the time-traveling phenomenon, but I think he is also the one working at the power plant as an adult. And then I later found out, oh, no, he is Charlotte's father-in-law, the father of Peter, the psychiatrist, and he is old man TikTok. And so all of that sort of clicked
Boom.
together in Crossroads. So I was
a time device.
Yeah,
Just whirring and spinning, such as Reed's brain watching, or any of our brains watching Dark Season 1.
So obviously that was a pretty major revelation. What's interesting about this is they start to kind of, they've been dancing around with, yes, we're dealing with time travel, so knowing that at this stage in the series that's the conceit of the show. So now they're starting to kind of play around with certain things causing certain other things, and certain things like preventing certain other things from happening. So, like, my very next note is the trenchcoat man coming in and stopping Jonas from taking Mikkel back. Mikkel.
Did you just say Nickelback? He's
taking Mikkel back.
That should have been a whole side story. Is somebody stopping that from happening?
He's like, I have this CD, but I have no way to play it. Oh my gosh!
I meant
unravels the fabric.
My version of that story was much darker than what you just said, but it had more in common with Ulrich and young Helga than with a CD. But
wow! Oh my gosh! Wow! But I liked his line that he says, which comes up again in the show, but I do love just the phrasing of it. Every decision for something is a decision against something else, which we'll unpack probably more when we discuss it thematically. But that was a pretty great line that I wrote down. I am still convinced, personally speaking, that the trenchcoat man will turn out to be, I called it last week, I am pretty convinced that Trenchcoat Man is going to turn out to be Jonas, and that he was stopping himself from taking Mikkel. Now I can't hear it otherwise. Now Mikkel. That will help, because I keep saying Mikkel. Yes. Mikkel.
Yeah.
Mikkel.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Nobody listens to Mikkel.
I've come to take Mikkel back. I've come to take Mikkel back to a Nickelback concert. I don't even know what's happening right now.
No, I don't either. But I like that moment, and I like that line.
But see, what's really fun about this pair of episodes is, if you'll recall, during maybe during the Girl Who Walks episode, I alluded to neglecting to recall who TikTok Man was.
Oh, yes, yes.
That wasn't me trying to throw you off the scent. In the moment, I just wasn't, because so much of that mythology puzzle piece gets laid in this episode.
Sure. Yeah. We spend more time with Helga in this episode than I think we did in any of the, because we had yet to see his 1953 iteration. We had not.
Because we hadn't been to 1953.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
So, like, because of that, there's so much that, like, because I can't even. No, we hadn't seen the boy version of him either, even though. Like, we don't know enough about that bunker or like that room where he's housed with that weird chair. Like, we don't know enough about that to really discern too much at this point. But yeah, we really had only seen the old man version of him. So yeah, you're right. All of that mythology surrounding him and his actions.
You actually, if you were to rewatch this season, you do see 86 Helga a couple of times early.
Really? Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's maybe in episode 2 or 3, the first time you meet 86 Claudia, she is pulling up to the power plant, and Helga greets her and gives her the gift, maybe of the book, gives her some sort of gift, and that's 86 Helga. Yeah.
Dang. Oh, wow. That's crazy.
A great little bit, a little touch that this show is super good at, that I just caught this particular viewing of 7, is there's a moment, when Jonas in 86 is walking the road to the hospital looking for Inez.
Right, yeah.
It's raining, and it cuts. I don't remember exactly who's first in this sequence, but there's a pair of scenes with Charlotte in 19 investigating at the power plant, immediately followed by Jonas, and it's raining in both scenes.
Oh, wow, that's cool. Yeah, I would have to go back and rewatch it to pick up on that, but that's cool. Yeah.
I love when 86 Egon asks, or Tiedemann, the
right,
asks what's that about his earbuds.
Oh, yes, and he's like, those aren't earphones. That was so
great.
Which
is just clicking with me now, is a great seed for what happens next episode.
Yeah, that's right.
In terms of the techno chrono chaos. Ooh,
Ooh, okay.
Talking about PGs. Dude, I did rewatch. Well, I skimmed 7 and 8 before our recording, when Ulrich, in 2019, when Ulrich is in the hospital room confronting Helga because he has discovered the notes of 86 Tiedemann about Helga going by a different road. Mm-hmm. He goes to confront him, and old man Helga, noting Ulrich, says, "I know you." And it's like, oh my God.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Because he's,
but it's a real quick throwaway phrase, because immediately it goes into, I can change the past and the future. And as a viewer, you get hung up on that, not realizing they just told you a major sort of note.
Which we will find, we'll talk about it this episode, because that's in episode 8. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Yeah. Oh, that's why I didn't catch that at that time.
Here's another great little note. I love that you're enjoying this show. 86 Helga eats a Raider candy bar.
Yeah, so I picked up on that, because that's that rapper that they had seen earlier.
Who finds it? Who finds the rapper in 19?
Oh gosh, let me remember that, because I saw that one time. I forget who found the rapper.
It's a kid.
Okay.
It is Elizabeth, the deaf girl.
Now, yeah.
Take note of the fact that she doesn't get taken, but the young man, the little boy in that episode does. Remember?
Right.
Why this only clicked with me watching this time. Why does Elizabeth not get taken?
I don't know. I'm not putting it together.
Because Helga is her grandfather.
So he wouldn't have. So he would not have kept. Oh,
right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dang. Yeah. Of course.
And so whatever.
Wow.
Because I do think there's a little confusion. I mean, ultimately, I will be interested to see how consistent this show is capable of being over the long haul.
Sure.
But there are things like, okay, is old man Helga just senile? How long has he been senile? Why would he have not recognized Ulrich previously?
Sure.
Because they are clearly playing the lost whatever happened card. Like, this is.
Oh yeah.
This is, time is immutable.
Mm-hmm.
From that standpoint. Before we move to 7, any other? I mean, I don't want to move to 8 yet, because I've got a couple other 7s, but I want to pivot to you.
Well, I only just two quick loves, and then this ends my notes on Crossroads, so you can finish us off and take us into 7. So I love the moment in 1986 when Katerina is defending Ulrich against the rape charge, and then it's immediately followed by the scene where she confronts him in 2019 about his affair. That is the reason it is such a powerful and potent moment is because I forget what the exact line is, but the transitional line is something like, he would never hurt me. He would never do that to me. And so you go from her defending him so strongly to then this moment where she is confronting him about the affair that he has had. And it's powerful storytelling. That's a really, really strong moment. Likewise, but in a different vein, I love the moment where Jonas is watching Mikkel and Hannah in 1986 meet each other and speak with each other, and the weight of the decision that he has to make, like, do I intervene? Do I step in? And so that moment is pretty powerful. So those are just some things that I really loved that took place in this episode about they really feel like, and again, most of this will be probably unpacked in our main episode, but really feels like they are wrestling with sort of the weight of consequence of certain decisions, like this notion of, if you could change things, would you? And again, that line that is going to come up again, every decision for something is a decision against something else. Like that, yeah, that's pretty powerful stuff. So that's all I had for 7.
One just pure technical note on 7 is I've got to get me one of those Jonas flashlights that you just kind of rub your hand across.
Oh, aren't they cool? Oh my gosh, that's great.
Pretty awesome. I get my last note is just, the episode 7 finishing with Noah in the bunker.
Writing.
Did you notice his back tattoo is the same art that's hanging in the hospital that Mikkel finds in 86?
And so what was funny is I noticed it, but did not. Like, I don't have any sort of theories or ideas about exactly what that means or anything. But I did take note of it. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
All right, let's get into episode 8. As you sow, so shall you reap, dude. 7 actually was a bit of a sleeper this time around. Like, it was like, okay, cool,
okay.
some good stuff. This one just, oh my gosh. One, because again, I forgot it didn't shock me because I'd seen it, but I forgot about the whole thread of 1953. Like, talk to me a little bit about your experience of that. Were you kind of bowled over by that? Was it just like, oh, okay, now we're doing this?
Not totally. So what was interesting though is when, and this happens, I forget how early in the episode, but it happens pretty early. So Ulrich is going through the cave, and he's finding the tunnel. He finds the door. He opens the door. He's coming to the same crossroads that we saw Jonas come to. And then I did take note. I was like, okay, Jonas went right. Ulrich went left.
Yeah.
And so I intuited, like, okay, Ulrich's going to go back to 1953. And so I thought that was really cool. It is interesting how they've created, because the symbol on the door that leads to these sort of disparate time tunnels, if you want to call it that, the door has that triad image. I forget exactly what they
Venn diagram looking thing.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. But I thought that's really interesting, and I forget if it is in this episode, but where the scientist, if I'm saying his name correctly, the H.G. Tannhaus, is postulating about, like, it's not just two directions. It's not just up or down. It's also, there's also a center. There's a third sort of element to things. And I just love that concept, the concept of this triune sort of conceptualization of time and space is really fascinating to me. And I love some of the scientific ideas that they're playing with. There's, listeners may not realize that I've watched further. Well, they probably do. I've watched further in the show than I'm able to speak about right now. If you've only listened, or if you've only watched up to episode 8, there's some very fascinating things in the next couple of episodes about just dealing with that weight of time and the impact of time. And I feel like it was, they're just wrestling with some really interesting ideas here.
Ooh, this is a big one.
There's something happens in this episode that I was like, oh God, I don't know if that's what you.
It's funny because I actually some of my most favorite aspects are actually in 9. It's just that 8 sets them up, and I'm just now discovering that. But
I gotcha.
I lovingly refer to Tannhaus as the Tinkerer because that's a Marvel villain.
Ooh, okay.
I do love that 53 Helga has 4 layers on, man. These folks know how to they dress. He's got a jacket, a sweater, a shirt, an undershirt.
Sure.
His mom's super weird, but whatever. I mean, there's so much. I don't know if it was this one or 9. I think it was 9, but 8 definitely introduces this. There's a real balancing act in this last couple episodes of plot, or rather of story and idea. I mean, they start to kind of rebound off each other a little bit, because after a while you're like, my brain is spinning. I'm going to throw this final note here, or a note from the end of the episode, and then we can fill in as desired. But I love that young Tinkerer in 53 finds Ulrich's abandoned coat that also holds his phone. And I just love that, like, Ulrich is the man. I already thought he was the man. I mean, he's got some troublesome, side life, but, and, some anger issues. But, maybe he's not the man at all. I'm
talking myself out of affection.
Yeah. I have changed my mind. And this is in real time, I love that Cozy and Stylish, like, he created it. He went back in time to 1953.
Yeah.
And, we get advanced technology and, stylish outerwear.
Cozy and stylish.
One little time travel note.
It's true. It's true.
You meet a lot of folks in this episode.
You do. Like, so many that I didn't write them all down, but, like, I can't even keep because we're meeting for the first time, really, all of the not all of them, because we met some of them in the last episode, but most of the 1953 sort of cast of characters just continue to get fleshed out. And so, it's, and I believe it's in the next episode where they do the little, like, they show every iteration of the people.
Great. Yeah.
So, but we'll get there when we talk about the big one. But there's just, you said, I think in the very first discussion we had about it, how expansive the cast of characters was, and that's no joke, because it's not just that we have the characters we have, but we have, for most of them, 3 versions of those
Yep.
characters, and it's pretty crazy.
Well, in this one, okay, there are some great moments. I love Ulrich's continued rolling bafflement at what he has fallen, the kind of rabbit hole he's fallen down.
Right.
When he meets the kid version of his dad and grandmother Agnes.
Oh yeah.
I love then, you may not have caught this, but when Ulrich finds his way to Tannhaus's shop, because he has the book, in walks 2 little girls.
Right.
Well, those little girls are Inez, the nurse.
Right,
and
I did catch that.
Jana, his mom. And
oh, yes.
remember the little girl? She gets freaked out because he whispers the word "mama" at her.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh man, it's just crazy stuff. Old Lady Tiedemann, like some Lady Agnes, a little bit of progressive, a little bit of forbidden love in 1953 Germany.
True that.
Any other notes for you on
I literally have one note on 8. That I haven't already talked about, and that is, I mean, it's the big one. It's the big reveal. It's the big crazy. Like, you keep talking about, and I'm not arguing with you here, but you keep talking about, like, Ulrich is a great character, but the generalized goodwill and rooting for him that I had completely falls out the bottom with this. As a crafted character, he's still pretty effective and he's still great. But for me, when you decide, for whatever reason, as he does in this episode, that in order to stop these atrocities, I have to beat this little boy to death with a rock. That's where.
Now, let me ask you this: Are you saying, because you just said for whatever reason, like, do you think the show poorly motivates that choice?
I don't think it poorly motivates the choice. I think he jumps to that conclusion rather quickly. So, in other words, maybe I do think it poorly motivates it, because here's what I think. I understand how somebody who is so definitively convinced that that is what has happened would do a thing like that. That doesn't require a lot of, like, getting my brain around a character doing that. But I did lose traction on why is Ulrich so convinced that it's Helga that is the source of all this. And so, like, so the show asks me to conclude that he has not only acclimated to the time travel phenomena, but also his detective brain has pieced together that it is Helga that is responsible for all of it. Now, that's what's crazy about it, is that we know, I mean, I don't remember if we know it definitively at this point, but that actually Helga is responsible for it. That's what's kind of wild about it. Not solely, he's not exclusively responsible for it, but he is the one actually, like, taking these kids. And so it's just it just was a bit of a stretch to me that Ulrich figured it out, because I didn't see that substance in his puzzle pieces. So I was like, and to make a decision like you're going to.
Oh, I get it. I understand. Yeah. And in fact, see, what's interesting about that is I find that an incredibly compelling scene, because partly it's just fantastically crafted. I mean, there's extreme tension in that scene.
Oh gosh, yeah, it's nerve-wracking.
And the score, I think even little Helga says, "You look tired" or something like that. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. I wouldn't push hard that it were like against your notion of you're not quite sure, you're convinced that the show did the work to get him his choice to that point.
I gotcha. Yeah.
But I can sort of see the desperation for resolution regarding Mikkel, his investigation in 19 yielding or revealing blind spots in Tiedemann's original investigation, leading him to TikTok Helga, leading him to follow him. There's a lot that I could see clicking into place, because clearly on behavior, old man Helga going on the lam is noteworthy to 19 Ulrich.
That's true. Now,
and so I think to him it's probably the case of the running is what what does a lot to convince him. And then the notion of the realization that Mads' body is in 19, the comprehension of what he's experienced by going into 53,
right?
The bodies that are in the nuclear plant. I don't know. I can sort of see that it doesn't take a ton to push him over the edge. And to me, what's fascinating about that scene, now, I wouldn't push hard against this maybe being a flimsy notion, but it's a thing that I found interesting, is to me what's cool about the show is, like you said, it's asking moral-based questions around its characters' interactions. And to me, him sitting there, he asks little Helga about the bird. Did you kill it? And I don't know if you remember this. Helga says no, but then he says they're beautiful when they're dead.
Oh, yes, I do remember.
And I just think, to me, there's this, I'm going to make a big leap here, but go with me, this notion of, if you could go back in time and kill Hitler, would you do it? That's a very extreme version of it. But that, to me, is what this is trying to do, is like, if you became convinced and or were absolutely right that the person as a child you were staring at commits heinous wrong in the future, how would you respond? Now add a layer to that the person who does heinous wrong took and possibly killed your own child. I don't know. It's a really fascinating sort of thread.
And you have in this moment reminded me of something that my conclusion was forgetting, and that is that he does question Helga's being in the woods when Mikhail disappears. He questions that before he ever goes back into time. So maybe I was being a bit unfair to the show. Like, I think maybe, and again, this is your second time through.
Right.
So perhaps if I, watch this through a second time, I will pick up on little breadcrumbs that they'd lay across the way that maybe at the moment I didn't have any context for and didn't know, like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. This is something that further substantiates later his decision to do that. Even still, the scene is pretty brutal. Like,
oh my gosh,
because for listeners who haven't watched this and are still listening to this conversation, basically Ulrich
in the dark.
Ulrich concludes that Helga, who is the old man in 2019 and the power plant worker in 1986, he is convinced that the young boy version of him in 1953 needs to be done away with, and so he attempts to kill him in a rather brutal scene, just with what he has at his disposal, which is a sharp rock.
And think too, like, from a pure character trajectory standpoint, you identified this scene 10 minutes ago now, prior to Ulrich in 2019 going to confront Helga in the hospital, is when he and Katharina finally fall apart, right? So, like, he's kind of lost it. He doesn't have anything left.
Yeah.
He's now chronologically displaced, which he has no clue what the ramifications of that are.
Sure.
I'm here, here is water. Can we be baptized? Here is child, potential killer. Let's do the deed. But anyway, I love that scene.
So before we leave it, just to connect the dots, so we were mentioning it earlier and didn't talk about it at that point, but so that substantiates when old man Helga sees Ulrich, and you pointed this out earlier, and says, I know you. He's staring into the face of the man who had tried to kill him as a little boy. And it is, that is pretty sharp when you think about it from a plotting standpoint, when you think about it from a storytelling standpoint. That's pretty sharp. And I like it. So
it is interesting to me. I feel like the show casually overlooks, and I'm ultimately kind of okay with it because I don't care that deeply, but the show is so intentional about the interconnectedness of the generations that a character like Helga, who we see in 3 timelines, we never meet a wife or ex-wife, yet he has the son Peter. I don't know, it's just kind of like okay, and he's also sort of kind of simple and senile the whole series, and so I don't know. It just
sure. No, I understand.
Rung out to me.
So yeah, that was all I had. We'll be covering, unless you had something more you wanted to say about either of these episodes. Next week, we will be looking not only at episodes 9 and 10, the penultimate and ultimate episodes of season 1, but they will be devoting the remainder of the episode to the thematics, the ideas that it's sort of playing with, and sort of close the chapter not only on speaking in tongues, but on season 1 of Dark. Do you want to take us out, or do you want me to do the honors?
This has been another installment of TV Guideposts. We now leave Ulrich in 1953, potentially a wanted man, potentially a murderer, of a child no less. But let's be honest, if you could go back and the lead singer of Nickelback were in front of you as a child, what might you do? Stay tuned till next week on TV Guideposts when, as Reed just mentioned, we will be discussing episodes 9 and 10 and diving deep down the Einstein-Rosen bridge of theme.
Oh, man. That's pretty amazing.
I'm so thrilled you're enjoying the show.
I am. Yeah, we'll land the plane next week, and I'll substantiate some more of my broader thoughts. But what's really funny is there's something that I've been meaning to ask you that I forgot to ask you, or I probably should have asked you.
Oh yeah, please. Is it like dark related or like Germany?
No,
related?
it's not quite dark.
Time travel.
No, not
Time
quite
travel?
dark or
No?
German related. No, it's not quite that. It's well, I'll just get right to it. It's
Please.
Well, you can tell me what you're watching now, what you're reading, and what you're listening to. I can't even go any further because here's the thing. Yeah.
What you watching?
So, in real time, at the moment, it's really funny because at the moment that I busted into that, my lovely wife walked into the room and I got stage fright.
Wow.
So, it's true.
Wow. That's hilarious.
So, but yeah, so Mr. Rouse, what are you watching, reading, or listening to?
Well, it's one thing,
Okay.
but it's representative. I'm gonna get real nerdy on you, Riri.
Oh,
So-
okay.
So, you and I off and on the show reference comics and comic reading, and I don't know, a month ago I referenced Immortal Hulk by Al Ewing, which is a fantastic book, and if you're into comics and or the Hulk at all, you would really enjoy.
Mhm.
Well, brother, I don't know that it'll mean anything to you, but the X-Men are back.
Oh, yeah? Really?
So, again, bear with me. I promise not to go quite on long, but it'll take me a second. You may or may not know this. You read, not you, constant listener, though constant listener might as well. But so when Disney bought Marvel, 5 years ago or whenever that was, 20th Century Fox owned the X-Men, Sony owned Spider-Man. Ultimately, they worked out the share deal with Spider-Man. Rest in peace, share deal with Spider-Man. But X-Men remained owned by 20th Century Fox until 6 months ago when Disney bought almost everything Fox owned except ESPN and Fox News. So in that interim time, Disney, even though Marvel continued to publish X-Men books, there was a common perception that wasn't totally untrue that Disney was kind of starving the X-Men brand.
Really?
Oh yeah. If you observe things like merchandise, there's limited to no merchandise associated with X-Men related material and or movies since Disney has bought Marvel.
Interesting. I mean,
and in
that's
fact,
true. I just didn't know
you
that.
also probably wouldn't know this, but the character Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan,
right.
who is an amazing character, and everyone should read that as well. But she is one of the Inhumans, which you may or may not know was a terribly poorly received sort of straight to TV movie that that Disney initially pitched as what would be a feature film when they did their massive, kind of press conference 5 years ago or whenever. Well, Disney/Marvel was, by common perception, muting the X-Men and supplanting them with the Inhumans. In publishing, there was a major push of the Inhumans about 4 or 5 years ago. This is where Kamala got originated. But it failed miserably. No one really took to the Inhumans. They flooded the publishing line with a bunch of characters nobody cared about or was familiar with. There were all these new dumb ones. and everybody was kind of like, I want my X-Men. And in the meantime, they've been producing fair X-Men books, if you are a fan of it. And I'm still reading Marvel Unlimited. That's why I kind of keep up. Well, when Disney made the Fox merger earlier this year,
right?
There's just been this common, like, when are they going to when are the X-Men going to be prominent again? Because this is getting so nerdy, but late 90s, the reason Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor became the household names they were is because they weren't worth anything in the late 90s as properties.
Okay.
So in the late 90s, Marvel went, or maybe the mid 90s, Marvel, the publishing line, went bankrupt, sold their IP, the movie rights. That's why Sony owned Spider-Man. That's why Fox owned X-Men. Nobody wanted what would we know now as the core Avengers.
Okay.
So they stayed in-house. Thus, when Marvel Studios started producing movies, hey, we've got these characters nobody has cared about. Thus, now we have Avengers Endgame, and we all know and love the Avengers worldwide.
Sure, right.
But the Disney thing happened. X-Men got muted because X-Men in the late 90s and early 2000s were just gangbusters. And the 80s.
Sure.
But about 6 years ago, I think I referenced it to you over time, the writer Jonathan Hickman, whose name is becoming legend in the halls of Marvel fans. He had a lengthy run on Fantastic Four, which is really solid. Then he pivoted that into a dual title run on Avengers and New Avengers. That led into Secret Wars, which for this 30-year comic reader at this point is maybe one of my favorite top 5 comic stories of all time, is Secret Wars. Nice. With the long tail of Hickman's run. Well, Marvel has been hyping for months now that Hickman was taking over the X-Men. The X-Men have just kind of languished as far as publishing goes, as far as compelling storytelling goes.
Sure.
They've continued to publish stuff, but it's all just been kind of just haphazard, and you can kind of read between the lines. They were barely making it work. Well, after like 3 years of not buying any current day comics because I have Marvel Unlimited, I was intentional about trying to resist buying the Hickman X-Men. And for any listeners who might be interested, and for you who might be interested, it's House of X and Powers of X. It's a tandem. It's 6 issues of one, 6 issues of the other. They bleed back and forth. It's effectively a 12-issue story. And like right now, they're about 6 or 7 issues into the 12-issue story. Those 6 issues, as a pure marker of how much people are lapping this up, those 6 issues I just saw sell on eBay for like $90. Which is insane for where the X-Men have been historically.
Sure.
But he is radically tweaking, refining, re-mythologizing the X-Men as a property. And dude, it's amazing. Like, I personally cut my teeth on the X-Men when I was a wee nerd. And let's rephrase that. I was never wee, but when I was a young nerd, the X-Men was my go-to. I'd kind of lost a bit of that love over the years. But man, it is compelling. It is fascinating. It's amazing. Think about Dark and what your brain does watching Dark, and how the clear machinations, the clear intentional plotting. It's that kind of thing. Sure. But with the X-Men, it's across timelines, just like Dark is. Anyway, if you're a comic fan, if you're even mildly interested in this stuff, I guarantee you. You know how last week you said, I'm going to stake my claim right here that I think Trenchcoat Man in the future is Jonas now. Right. I'm saying right now, what Hickman is doing in the X-Men is what is going to be used for the template when they start getting introduced. And MCU and stuff. I mean, it's just cool. It's that level of rebranding. It's fantastic. Yeah. It's fascinating. If that's you awesome. Have mild interest in nerdy things, because that was clearly quite nerdy. It is very worth you checking out Jonathan Hickman's House of X and Powers of X. Great stuff.
Awesome. That's very exciting.
Are you just? I feel like you're just saying that.
I'm not. No, I mean, I have never.
It's okay. I know that was a real deep dive.
So here's the deal. I don't really care about any of that, but I.
Oh, wow.
I'm kidding.
Wow.
Oh. Wow. You are not taking any of my bait tonight. So,
well, I lost you on the video feed, so I can't tell I can't see your sarcastic face.
I can't see your sarcastic face. So So I have watching a
You were going to respond about X-Men. Now I feel like you're pivoting away, and I'm self-conscious about talking about the X-Men for 10 minutes.
No, so I mean, my casual joke aside, I have honestly never been so Marvel Studios have helped invigorate so much of my Marvel fandom.
Right.
Prior to that, I would say I was more acquainted with the mythology of like DC characters. Like I loved Superman, I loved Batman, and so the Marvel characters that really connected with me prior to that would have been Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man. So I was aware of X-Men, watched the X-Men films when they came out, but X-Men have never really been a grouping of people that I would get terribly passionate about. And I will say, like in full disclosure, that is still true today. Like even with my admiration for the existing, some of the existing X-Men movies and all of that, like just it's not a property that has ever really invigorated me as a fan. I connect more deeply with certain other storylines and plot lines or everything. But sincerely, your description of how Jonathan Hickman is rebranding them and perhaps introducing them to a new legion of fans. I mean, like I didn't really care very much about Iron Man until Robert Downey Jr. assumed the role, and so it's exciting to consider the possibilities that I will become much more endeared to them.
I would encourage you, once this wraps and there's like physical kind of collected editions out, to definitely read it. But as a final note on that, just as a germ of potential interest, I don't know if this will be compelling to you at all, but the loosest, most basic, without spoiling a lot of where the books go, because it's really incredibly well written, high intellectual brain type of storytelling. But effectively, the loose premise is mutants as a population group get wise and finally uniformly band together. Not so much against humans per se, but set themselves as a nation unto themselves. Like, and there's a great scene in the very first issue of Hickman's run where the Fantastic Four are talking to Cyclops, Scott Summers, and say, you don't have to do this. You don't have to be this isolationist. And he says, if everyone told you were less than your entire life, don't you think you'd be a little reactionary too? And like the whole thing is like mutants against the world idea. In other words, no longer Magneto versus Xavier, Apocalypse versus Xavier, whoever. It is purely mutantdom. Right. If you are mutant, you are part of the nation. It's really, and that's kind of just the barest of sort of lead-ins for the whole thing. Anyway, that's enough nerdiness. What is your Whatcha? Because now I'm self-conscious.
So no, don't be. If your self-consciousness is about to evaporate before you, like so much.
I mean, you did talk about the Bee Gees the way you did. So
let's calm down here a second. No, so I have a watching, reading, and listening to all in one sort of thing. It is kind of crazy. Anybody who would tease me about my apparent recent reading habits are really going to love this. So I am listening to an audiobook of the novelization of the 2018 Halloween film by David Gordon Green.
Oh my gosh!
So
the layers.
I know, right? So it is. It's a watching, it's a reading, and it's a listening to. So yes. So the what's funny is I was listening to a podcast that I mostly enjoy. That's a side subject, but there's a podcast that kind of unpacks all of the Halloween films. It's a group called the Halloweenies. I really enjoy listening to the guys, but they actively disliked, for the most part, the 2018 film. And with my strong affection for it, obviously it's like, whatever. But one of the things that...
real quick interjection there, do you find merit in their critique?
Not against that one.
Right,
now,
right. Okay.
I'm being very dismissive against people who aren't here to defend themselves, but no, like what they criticized about it, the only thing that I can kind of understand is one of the things that they criticized about it was, well, they did... here, if I can summarize a main complaint against the 2018 Halloween film, is they said the director, creators, all of these guys, Danny McBride, David Gordon Green, made a big deal about we're going to do away with all the sequels.
Right.
And then basically did a bunch of things that harken back to previous things sequels had done.
Okay.
So that was their big
kinda see
complaint. For me, I was like, well, it was also kind of presented as a back to basics
Right.
kind of thing. So you would, again, you would kind of expect they're going to be getting into, to me, I viewed it as like, well, yeah, if you get, a rock band that has been disbanded for however long, and you get the band back together, like, and to some degree, you're going to want to hear some of the greatest hits. Like, there's
and
be
to your
something to
point, you and I have actually never. I don't know if other than just a passing we saw it. We've never talked about it. Definitely haven't featured it. We did
Sure.
a Feelin' Film together on that with Aaron White. But
Right.
I would say for someone like me who is not versed in the lore, I'd seen the first one because you and I covered it, and because we watched it at Gardner Webb together. But also you showed me the second one in H2O, but that's it. And so to me, I would almost say your back to basics is my accessible. It's just kind of like, well, I don't need or want all the stuff. So give me this accessible entry that just kind of, yeah, go ahead.
Well, and what's interesting about that, and you just reminded me of this, you've seen H2O, and you saw H2O prior to seeing David Gordon Green's Halloween. Some of the major complaints revolve around, from them, revolve around like, well, H2O did this and did it better. And so that's a lot of their complaining. Now, I love H2O. I love it, but I also love David Gordon Green's version of Halloween. And so yeah, I mean, like, again, I don't want to beat up too much on them because apparently their distaste for the film was very controversial amongst their listenership. So I'm not alone in, that particular frame of it. But the reason, to get back to the source of my watch and read and listen to, they, in one of their episodes, one of the participants in that podcast was reading the novelization, and they had expressed some appreciation for it. They said, like, well, no, I didn't really like the film, but this novelization is pretty interesting and pretty good. And so I was like, oh, well, let me look it up, let me see. And my local library did not have the novelization itself, but ironically had the audiobook. So I was like, oh, okay, perfect, that's fine. So I grabbed that, and it is interesting because it is the major beats of the film, but as you would expect from a novelization, there's greater character depth, there's more character interaction, there's more substantiation of some of the themes that they're dealing with, because you can spend 2 pages of material dealing with a character's inner life that would have been nothing more than maybe 15 to 20 seconds in the film. Right. So it does, like, I will say this, like, for people who enjoyed the film, I think you might find this novelization rewarding. Or if there are people who didn't care for the film, I think maybe you should check out this novelization because it's pretty interesting. There are no major surprises in it. Now, at this point, I am not quite finished with the book, so I am curious to find out. And
you mean the audiobook?
With the audiobook, yes.
Of the movie.
Okay,
right.
So listen. So, but at this point, I have not yet reached the ending, so I do not know, because I know notoriously this ending was changed from a test audience that did not take too kindly to the original ending. I don't know if this novelization will have the ending in the film that we saw, or if it will have that different ending that apparently did not test well with audiences. So when I finish the book, I will report back and let you guys know what that's all about. But that's what I have been listening to / reading / in my mind remembering the film, so watching.
I'm waiting for the Bee Gees to take us out. What you watching? What you watching? What you watching?
Well, you can tell by the way I watch those things and read them and listening to. Oh boy. I love the 70s.
Goodness gracious.
Okay.
Between the Rocket Man song last week. Man. People are gonna look at the show notes and be like, I'm gonna skip what you're watching.
So here's what's interesting.
What? Tell me.
Normally, and I do have some stuff. So I'm going to make this brief. We've already been going for quite a long time. But I like to give, as we have with all of these hashtag speaking in tongues, I like to give some specific recommendations to other films that come from the same region. And it's funny because Japanese horror of all of the ones that we have covered so far, I think no region has more impacted the horror genre, the mainstream American horror genre, more than Japanese horror films, because in the late 90s there was a tremendous amount of, like, they would have these horror films, specifically like ghost and spirit stories from Japan, specifically Ringu, Ju-on, and they were translated into American remakes. The Ring, The Grudge, Dark Water, One Missed Call. So there's a lot of them that, by and large, with the possible exception of The Ring, for the most part, audiences that have seen both the Japanese originals and the American remakes will prefer the Japanese originals. I do want to make one comment about a film called Audition. Have you heard of Audition?
I've heard of it, yes.
I heard of it, yeah. So I do want to make one comment about Audition.
It's pretty rough, right?
It is very rough. In fact, I wanted to mention Audition. I'm not quite recommending Audition. I don't even think I'm recommending it at all, but it is an important film. It's
kind of like auditioning in general. It sounds pretty harrowing.
Yes, basically, yes. It's pretty scary. But Audition as a film, it was directed by Takashi Miike, and it is directly responsible for inspiring one Eli Roth to go and make to go and make the film Hostel. So Audition is sort of softly credited for inspiring the wave of more graphic, torturous sort of films that saw their wave in the early 2000s from the horror genre. So again, it is a very challenging film. It's incredibly well made. I don't want to be dismissive to it. It is incredibly well made. It's very powerful and affecting, but I have a pretty strong palate for stuff, and Audition is rough. It is very, very rough, to the degree that I don't really want to rewatch it myself. But one film that I do love and that I will highly recommend, if I am saying the Japanese name right, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Nathan. It is Kairo or Kairo, but it is Kairo, and it is pulse is the word that was that's the Japanese word for it. It was translated to an American remake, of course, called Pulse, and that American remake is abysmal. But the original Japanese film, again, Kairo or Pulse, is amazing. It's a wonderfully crafted ghost story. You would think it's a very rather silly premise involving like technology and people with cell phones and sort of spiritual happenings going on through technology that sounds kind of silly when you look it up on paper, but is a very, very effective film. So my formal recommendation from the Japanese region, other than the film we're covering today, is Kairo or Pulse. Seek out the Japanese original.
Kairo.
Okay,
got a
thank
little
you.
kind of roll, kind of little.
Kairo.
Okay. Yeah, there you go.
Hey, thank you. So now, without further ado, with the recommendations out of the way, with the watching, reading, listening to out of the way, and with the TV guideposts out of the way, Nathan, we are diving into a film called Kwaidan today, and Kwaidan is a favorite film of mine. I don't even know if I can quite articulate just what a big deal this film is to me. I love.
Well, okay. Well, give us a little context here. Okay, I'm worried that from this second on that question, like I don't know that it would be awful, but as far as contributions go, but I don't know that I'm going to be able to speak again by asking that question the rest of this episode, however long it may be from here on out. But
it's not quite Ernest
Come
Scared
on,
Stupid.
Like, well, I don't know. I had a lot to say about Ernest Scared Stupid. What? See, I don't even know.
Okay.
Why on earth? This sounds terrible. I'm not.
Okay.
Cut to the end here. I am not a hater of Kwaidan, but it's work. Now, how did this come? I'm an Enneagram 4. I am like a need to be different. Like, I love being a nonconformist. I'm like, oh, you don't like that? Well, I love it. Yeah. But you are traditionally not quite that way.
No.
Like,
I'm pretty populist.
But this feels like one of those moments where you're like, well, you know what? I love it because I'm a smart intellectual cineast.
No. So,
I'm ribbing you. I'm not calling you
I know.
hoity-toity, but this movie is work, and I'm curious. I'm curious how it became this. You know what I actually wrote down, Reed?
Sure.
I said,
what?
I know Jesus is on every road, but this is a long road.
It is a lengthy movie. Okay. I've mentioned this in passing on the show before. I have been prone in days and decades prior to just visiting the library and browsing the various shelves. I would frequently bring home a couple of books that just the title or the cover caught me. I would sometimes go in there with intention to pick up a certain thing, but most of the time I would just browse and pick up things that interested me. Well, on this one particular occasion, I was browsing the video section of the library and saw a film, and on the cover of this film, now this will it'll mean something to you. If listeners haven't seen this film, it may not mean something to you. On the cover of the film was a close-up picture of Hoichi with his face covered in that writing.
Yeah.
That image arrested me, and I was like, oh, this is interesting.
Which is an arresting image, so I'm down with you there. Yeah.
And so that image arrested me, and I looked on the back, and I just simply saw 4 ghost stories. I was like, oh, okay, all right, I'll check this out. The runtime was a little intimidating, but I was like, okay, well, let me see it.
Now, was that the shortened version, or was that the 3-hour version?
It was the slightly abbreviated version. So we'll get into this a little bit later, but there have been 3 released versions of the film. One is only 2 hours in length and omits an entire story. One was the widely released Criterion version for a long time that was it was 2 hours and 40 minutes long. And then the version you saw and the version that is widely circulated right now is the full 3-hour uncut edition that was originally envisioned. So I saw the 2 hour and 40-minute version first. And from the opening credits with those drops of paint into the liquid and dispelling, I was like, oh wow, this is different. This is kind of captivating. And so I'm sitting there, and the credits go on for like 4 minutes, right? And so I'm sitting there, I'm like, wow, and I'm just watching it because I'm like, I don't know what happening next. And I will tell you, it is the opening sequence of the first story where those gates open.
Black hair.
And it just, the opening sequence of Black Hair where it just pushes in to that house, and it's quiet, and it's still, and dude, I love me a great ghost story, but my problem with the majority of ghost stories is that for my sensibilities, for a ghost story to be really effective, it depends tremendously upon atmosphere. And it depends tremendously upon like space and a little bit of patience and something like that. Like those are the most effective ghost stories to me. And so immediately when I saw that, I was like, oh dang, this is pretty cool. And so I completed the entire film. And I remember when I ended the film for that first viewing, I was like, man, I loved that. It was so different what I had been kind of acclimated to at the time. But so this is interesting. We just brought up Audition, which had, sort of been, it was made in 1999. There was a wave in horror at the time of graphic violence and extreme sort of kind of demented and twisted and extremely graphic in its depiction of violence. That became somewhat prominent in the 2000s, in the early 2000s. And this, when all of that was happening in the horror world, to see a film like this that is so patient and is just interested in a very, very simple narratives, elegantly filmed. It really was a breath of fresh air. You know
how like 45 minutes ago, I said, Ulrich is a good man, and then within like seconds, I was doubting that statement.
Right.
Well, that's not going to happen here. Reed, like, you're a good man. You are a good man. Like, let me ask you this question though. What stage of life were you in when this library adventure happened? Like,
I was single, living alone.
Oh man. I knew that's what you were going to say. Because you know what makes me so mad about life sometimes is context is everything, brother.
Sure.
Oh my gosh.
No, I get it.
So, you didn't ask me this, but one, I'm curious how you want to approach the the general chatting about this movie. Do you want to
Sure,
go
sure.
story by story? But to hear, you know what? Like this movie, I was watching it and I was like, dadgummit, this is compelling. It's interesting, but oh my God, it's so long. Like, I wish a month ago, now I'm not putting this off on you, but I wish a month ago you'd been like, hey Nathan, in a month, we're going to be covering Kwaidan. Now, it's long, but it's 4 stories. Now, what I want you to do is, pour your little glass of wine, a little cider, whatever it is Nathan drinks while he watches movies or podcasts with, Fireball whiskey, and just do one at a time. And just apply no pressure to yourself, because when the clock starts ticking, tick tock,
sure,
says Helga, sure. You're gonna be like, oh my God, Hoichi the earless. Will someone just rend that man's ears from his head, because this story needs to end. But it sounds like I'm crapping on the movie. I'm actually not. It's just because I do find it interesting. I found it. Right. I think the stories are very great. Like it's the kind of stories like what you just described I would have responded to in a context that's more like restful. And in fact, a lot of what I kind of responded to is what you described, this sort of intentional, paced, quiet, largely quiet. Meditative, which is very Japanese.
Meditative is a perfect word for this film.
Kind of, but doggone, it is, or Kwaidan, it is not. It is not easy watching for a 2019 busy life.
Well, and see, sure. and here's what
which makes it sound. Hear me, I am not pooping the movie.
No, I don't hear that at all. No, in fact, I think that's the thing. This is a film that is so atypical of, like, I have difficulty when I recommend the film to people. I always have to qualify it with like 45 different things, and that does.
One of them is, how many kids you got?
Because it is, and it is. It's kind of difficult, because I will tell you this, like, and I thought this while I was watching the film this time around, dude. I watched this twice in preparation for the podcast. Like I did.
I am pulling a Ulrich's a good man moment now. I'm taking it back. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
So, but like one of the things for me that I loved about it, and I remember sitting here, I was like, this is like a night at a stage play. That's what this feels like. This is the kind of thing where I'm like, it insists that you sit and you attend to it. And if you don't,
I know.
Then you're going to not quite.
You're going to fall asleep. You're going to watch the clock. You're going to be drumming your fingers towards the end.
Yeah. I mean, this is a film.
Your wife, when hearing you're watching a 3-hour 1964 Japanese ghost story anthology movie, is going to be like, you couldn't pay me $100 to do that.
Right.
Actually, what she said is maybe 100.
But it is. It's the kind of thing that, like, it is really best enjoyed in one of two ways. Either A, you have 3 hours of 3 to 3.5 hours of unencumbered time that you can just sit and focus on it, or perhaps with like 2 broken segments where you could watch, because they are complete stories in and of themselves, where you watch the first 2, which takes about an hour and 25 minutes, and then the next 2, which takes about an hour.
Or just one at a time.
Just one at a time.
I've got slight substantiation for where I'm coming from here. I feel like I've said multiple times on the show before about anthologies, specifically in the context of things like King books,
Right.
One of the reasons I don't enjoy anthology books, even though I love the stories in them often, is the now this isn't a fault of the form, it's a fault of me, but this weird kind of accomplishment syndrome that happens when you're consuming a piece of media.
Oh,
you're
like,
I
see. Yeah, right.
I'm reading a book. Oh, it's a 1,000-page The Stand. Like, oh my God, yeah. But you get the end of it, and you're like, I finished The Stand. You pick up Everything's Eventual, and you're like, I finished The Man in the Black Suit. Now there's a dozen more. Anyway,
right.
Same kind of idea here, which is the feeling you get to the end of one. You're like, now I gotta get back on the horse.
That's funny. Well, and it's interesting too, because you are not alone. I am a bit of an outlier in this. That so the film was widely praised and still is to this day by American critics. But it received a relatively tepid response from audiences because it was brought over from Japan, like kind of tangential to like the Godzilla films. So when you've got like action spectacle, and then they
you
drop...
see Kwaidan and you're like, sayonara.
Right. So like I get it, and it is something where
Kaiju.
like if you're listening to us on this, like, I mean, I am going to heap a mountain of affection on this film. And I feel like if it is the kind of thing that interests you, like, yes, it's meditative, it's deliberately paced. It does not relent with that. It's not like, oh, it's deliberately and slow paced, but if you get to the end, then things pick up and it's all over. No, like, it is a meditative film. And
you know how, man, there's so much. I just feel like I don't know what, but like, remember how last week I made a comment about Dark and how sometimes I just feel stupid watching things? Like, each story, not Woman in the Snow. Woman in the Snow is a pretty straightforward narrative.
Sure.
But, so, you know, we go wherever we want, but it's Black Hair, Woman in the Snow, Hoichi the Earless, and then the Cup of Tea. So four stories. The method of editing, like the actual film editing, is such that things like, again, bear with me, like be generous with me, be patient with me, be meditative with Nathan right now as he like laments his 2019 brain's inability to slow down. But just the editing, I was like, I don't even know what's happening. Like, the amount of energy, mental energy, and I'm not saying it's bad, like art. It's art. It's art.
It is art.
And as someone who wants to be an appreciator of art, but sometimes it's just like, dadgummit, just give me Godzilla. You know, like,
dadgummit, just give me Godzilla. That's
learn to throw your voice. Fool your friends. Phone at parties.
That's Nathan's hot take on this week's Speaking in Tongues. Dadgummit, just give me Godzilla.
Nice,
my gosh, that's awesome.
Nice effing kaiju.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
But, 10 minutes into Black Hair, I'm like, oh my gosh, the amount of mental energy I am exercising to figure out what is happening in this story. To the point when I said I feel stupid is once, because I didn't read anything. I just trust my friend Reed to not lead me astray. Now, all I know is anthology. So
sure.
Once, this was most evident in Hoichi, but also present in Black Hair as well. Once the story starts locking in, because it's not just a 3-hour film from 1964. It is a 3-hour 1964 anthology from Japan, rooted and bedrocked in a culture you are utterly unfamiliar with.
Yes.
And so, like,
absolutely. Yeah.
And all the potential film craft styling of that region. So there is so much requiring your intention and attention. And so once some of the stories, I mean, Cup of Tea is pretty short, so it's not that big a deal, but Hoichi and Black Hair specifically, I remember once the stories are in the last kind of third for each of them, or last fourth, I was like, yeah, that's a pretty cool story.
Yeah,
right. Doggone it, that was work to make me feel that way.
Right. No, I get it. And that's the thing that it's like, I think it's good that we're discussing the film the way that we are, because I do feel like this is a film that you've got to enjoy, at least to a degree. Like, I would not recommend this to a film that's like, I don't like slow-paced films. Like, stuff's got to get moving. I'm like, you will hate
the whole day.
Like, that's not your film.
All day. I've been like, doggone it, I don't know if I can recommend this. There's going to be so many qualifiers attached to my recommendation.
No, I understand. But I will say this, and will be two sides of that coin. Man, I will say this, if you appreciate an evening of live stage theater, and you potentially go into a film like this with that mindset versus the initial cinematic mindset, you might have some appreciation for it. But if you, the other sort of side of that is that if you also just enjoy artful, like dramatic, slower paced cinema, this is an easy recommend. If you already are acclimated to slower paced, deliberate, sort of independent type films, then I think it would be easier to get on the wavelength for a film like this. But yeah, go ahead.
But if you're watching it to check a box, you are going to struggle, my friend.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
That said, all sort of tomfoolery aside for the next 2 seconds, you made this comment about the theatricality of it. That's actually a broad note I wrote that is a love. I mean, I love the high theater of it. It is very it's very presentational. I love the sets.
The sets.
The sets are fantastic. And it's, again, I am so far removed, not just from the innermost depths of Japanese culture, but also the film craft of that era from that region. So it's hard to know, like, what's intentional, what's kind of, you know what I mean? Like, it's just hard to know what, I mean, everything's intentional. I don't mean that, but as in, like, am I just observing something from a different era? Am I observing something from a different era and different region that's just very intentional in its presentation? I just don't know. Right. But I did love the sets, the temple in black hair. Oh
man, it's great.
The woman of the snow, or woman in the snow, whatever it is.
Woman in the snow.
I mean, sets wise, a little less so, but Hoichi, one of the strongest runs of the whole 3 hours is when he's actually in the ghost temple. I mean, that's
with the fog and the man, it's such a great shot. Well, so you mentioned the sets, and I'm so appreciative that you loved that element of it. So the director Masaki Kobayashi was a skilled painter before becoming a filmmaker. These sets were hand painted inside
that makes sense.
Yeah, inside of an airplane hangar. So everything that you see is very much like, you and I both got theater degrees. Like the everything you see is very much like, let us build a set and then let us populate this set with characters and present to you this story in a very sort of staged manner. And yes, I just absolutely love it. It actually was filmed on 2 separate sound stages. So the director was, while filming one story, would be overseeing the set design and stage design of the next story in the other soundstage, so that they wouldn't have to so dramatically tear everything down to the same place to do it. Let me ask you. I'm cool to hang for a 3-hour runtime right now, but do you, knowing where we're at, like, do you have a particular? Do you want to address each one? Do you want to highlight favorites? Like, what would be? So here's what I'd kind of like to do. Yeah, we've been talking a long time.
I don't care. I just think if we're gonna go point by point on 4 different ones, that may be.
No, that's going to be a long time. So let me run through just a couple of quick trivial bits, and then we can express. We'll just kind of go through plot wise, and maybe some, if you have a highlight or a comment to make about any of the specifically, then we'll kind of try to make our way through each of them on a cursory, superficial level rather quickly, and then we can talk about some thematics to close things out. But a couple of things, trivial. Kwaidan is literally translated as ghost story or ghost stories. And the 4 stories were meant to be evocative of the 4 seasons, beginning with autumn, the fall for black hair, obviously winter for woman in the snow, and then spring for Hoichi the Earless, and summer for In a Cup of Tea. What?
You are just getting the unfiltered takes of 3 hours of meditative Japanese 60s theatrically presented, kind of ghost stories. But even Hoichi, I was like, he ain't earless. I don't know what this title is, but he can't see, but he's got ears. I see him right there. So anyway,
that's funny.
Please carry on.
So no, that's okay. So this was the Japanese entry. It was nominated for an Academy Award for foreign language film, 1966. Did not win. I forget what won that year. But
I thought the film was 64, but maybe I'm wrong.
The film is 64, but it was not. The rules are different for when it was applicable to be nominated, and so that's the gap of those couple of years. But no, it was released officially in 1964. So I mentioned earlier there were 3 versions. The 2-hour version basically just omits the story, The Woman in the Snow. That isn't present for it at all. It's just black hair, Hoichi, and Cup of Tea. The 2 hour and 40-minute version has all 4 stories, but each of them are in a slightly abbreviated version. So the full version just takes its time and expands out both of those with some additional shots, a couple of deleted scenes here and there. But the last note that I have that's somewhat trivial, well, maybe not the last, but then we'll start moving through the stories. So the head priest in Hoichi the Earless is played by a renowned Japanese character actor named Takashi Shimura, who has more than 250 acting credits on his IMDb, and he appeared in nearly 20 of the films of Akira Kurosawa, who was arguably Japan's most popular and famous director to come to Western audiences. So I just wanted to point him out because in terms of like star power, as much star power as you can get from a film like this from this era, that head priest was, the equivalent of like a major star at the time. So the one thing I do want to mention is the musical score. The score is fascinating to me. It is utterly fascinating because it does not pervade every single moment of the film. There's so much silence, but when it comes in, it's so fascinating because it can be jarring. I have a couple of quotes from the composer. The only name that I have is Takemitsu. I don't know if that's a last name or if that was like a stage name, but in his career, he had more than 100 film scores, and he said about Kwaidan that he wanted to create an atmosphere of terror. If the music is constantly saying, "Watch out, be scared," then all of the tension is lost. So instead, he would withhold certain, musical moments until he felt like it was going to create a maximum impact, like once the horror is unveiled. But he used real wood for some of the sound effects. Like he would like crack and break wood and layer that over like a tone on an instrument, and that's how a lot of those sounds were created. And it's really an inventive score. It's not the type of score that you would cue up and just like listen to, but as a companion piece to the film, it's really, really wonderful. So just kind of moving through the stories, I'm going to summarize the plots of each one, and as we go through them, then we can just, if you have a comment to make about it. So the first one's called Black Hair. Basic premise is there is a young samurai who has fallen on some impoverished time because the person he worked for, I forget if it says the ruin of his master, but I don't know if that means that he died or if there was some scandal or something, but he comes into poverty. And he has an opportunity to take another position, but that other position means marrying the daughter of the person he's going to go and now work for, which means he has to leave his current wife. So his current wife loves him, is very devoted. He leaves her to go pursue his fame, and then it's a loveless marriage that he steps into, and all of that, becomes very bitter to him and difficult. So he decides to make his way back, and when he makes his way back, the woman has forgiven him and accepts and welcomes him. And I am just going to spoil everything about these films for those who are not interested in watching a 3-hour film, although I think even if you know what's happening, it's pretty rewarding. But so then when he returns, he has a loving night with her, and she takes him back, she forgives him. He awakens the next morning to find that the house that he has returned to is in utter disarray, which it did not appear to him at first. It is in utter disarray, and the woman that he was lovingly embraced by the night before is actually a rotting corpse next to him. And so it's very alarming when he discovers that. You said you had some trouble getting on the wavelength of this particular story, but you said ultimately, like at the end, you kind of like, oh, that was cool. Was that just?
Yeah,
I don't want to be too reductive. Part of it's just,
please reduce. No, I mean, I just meant like just dialing into the whole film, not just by story, but like just the whole film and its delivery flavor takes some conscientiousness, and so it took, and the editing is a little distinct from what we'd be used to in a current sort of presentation.
Sure, yeah,
and it is a little. So you'd seen it once, you watched it, then you rewatch it for this. That's 9 hours of your life. But
oh, I've seen it multiple times. I just rewatched it twice for this presentation.
Sure, right.
I've seen it probably half a dozen times.
Wow.
I know. Your microphone just fell.
I know. I I feel like Jonas staring at a truck with his child mother and her father. No, I liked Black Hair. It just took a bit because again you're kind of learning as you go. You're learning
right.
a cultural sort of hierarchy and sort of system and dynamics as you're watching a movie that takes a little sort of adjustment to. And yes, by the end of it, and then I was like, now I'm confused. Did he come home was he hold the whole time? It was a little confusing, but the general flavor I did enjoy. And a few funny notes was, so his second wife, who is consistently dressed in purple and has some like hella weird black teeth, is weird.
I don't quite know what that was about.
Yeah, I don't either. He's sleeping at one point, and I said, "Oh, purple girl comes in and tries to put the woo woo on him, and she gives him the hard pass while he's sleeping, and she smacks him twice, and then shows these weird teeth. It's like, what is going on? I don't know."
He wrote down tries to put the woo woo.
And then he gave her the hard pass. Yeah, man. He was
that's
like,
nah,
man. I gotta go back to the Black Hair.
God, I love the shot where he's in because one of the things I love about this story is just how haunted he is by the decision he's made. We'll get to that in theme, but I love the shot where he's like in the archery tournament or like in the archery practice and like keeps getting arrested
that
by
was
images of his.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's wonderful. Now I will say that
I can go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. You.
All I was gonna say is a couple of these I can identify where I started to doze off because then I woke up. So when that's meant to be funny but also slightly true, he falls asleep next to what he thinks is his rediscovered bride. And he wakes up, and the shriek he emits when he discovers the corpse, like that.
Oh my gosh!
I was probably close to dozing there, and I was like, "Oh, I'm awake. Oh, I'm here. Yep,
you got my attention.
I'm awake. Yep. Oh gosh, she's freaky.
Now
she did.
She did. I will say that as almost silly as the recurring attacks of the Black Hair are. Oh, we haven't mentioned that yet. So the corpse is there, but then strangely the Black Hair that is sitting there like it begins to kind of attack him. And as silly as that kind of thing is, I find the combination of like that minimalist score that we were talking about, the slightly tilted camera angles and the frenetic performance of the actor there, it has a kind of a disturbing effect to me.
Oh yeah, I described it as a macabre dance. That was very effective. His aging / decay.
Oh my gosh!
And
yes.
If any constant listener remembers my take of the first It film and the book on our Quarterly King, hair can be the most gorgeous, luxuriant thing in the world, but it can be nasty too. And by the end of Black Hair, it's nasty.
That is true. That is very true. So I think we can leave that one there for the moment. We might come back to it in theme. But the second story is called The Woman in the Snow. The biggest sort of trivial bit I want to mention to that is that if any listeners have seen the film Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, there was a different adaptation and iteration of this same story called Lover's Vow. That is almost beat for beat this story, but modernized, of course, with some new Tales from the Dark Side-esque twists to it. But so obviously, one of the things that might have stood out to you, I mentioned these were hand-painted sets. The sky in The Woman in the Snow is specifically designed to resemble a face with the eyes looking down. Did you catch that? These ominous eyes that were constantly watching over the fishermen. So the clouds.
Listen, Reed. I know last week and this week I said sometimes I feel dumb. I don't think I'm actually dumb. Yes, I noticed the eyes in the background.
So, I don't know. Maybe you were dozing. Maybe you would be like, "Oh my God, this movie's so long." I don't know.
Wait. Woman in the Snow. I don't remember that one at all. I'm just kidding.
Wait, there's 4 stories?
Right. Oh, God. Hey, can I tell you a really funny story live on air right now?
Sure, yeah.
So you know how like 2 years ago during our Universal series we covered The Mummy?
Right.
On that episode, late in it, you start talking about a scene. And I just sort of yes and you.
Yeah.
But in the moment I'm like, I don't know what he's talking about. It's because I dozed off during the movie and didn't realize I'd missed a whole chunk.
That is hysterical. That is so
I just remember
funny.
you talking. I was like, man, I don't remember that.
What does he do? Did he watch
But it was like whole plot elements. Like, okay,
oh
whatever.
my gosh, that is hysterical.
Anyway.
So
Carry
yeah,
on.
the loose premise of this is that there's an older fisherman and his younger protege. They are trapped in a blizzard, and then while they're trying to kind of survive the night, the young protege wakes up and discovers that there is a woman who has basically sort of breathed ice upon his older companion, and the woman goes over and starts to like the presumption is that she's going to kill him, but she takes pity on him and she makes him vow that he will never tell about what has taken place that night. So the young fisherman survives, moves on with his life, and then later on he meets a young woman. They fall in love. They develop a family. They have a family together, a few children, and so he's very happy. He's very satisfied. Like 10, I can't remember if it's 10 or 15 years later. I want to say 10. They're sitting in their home alone together. And suddenly he looks at her, and when he looks at her, he has a flash memory of that night back of the woman in the snow. And so then he tells his wife about what had happened and how he thought it was a dream. And when he tells her this, she grows somber for a moment and then turns and reveals that she was actually the woman in the snow. And so, basically tells him that if it was not for the children that they now have, that she would end his life right where he stood, and then leaves him sort of forever. That is the substance of the story. Most people that when I read like online reviews and everything like that, most people find this story the most interesting, or this story sort of the most compelling. Yeah,
Interesting, because I find it the most predictable.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
And if you're keeping score at home, so I started to doze when they fell asleep in hairball. What will wake you up in this one is not thinking by any stretch of the imagination that a 1964 foreign language nominated Japanese 3-hour anthology series would have nudity in it, and all of a sudden it does, and your spouse is walking through, you're like, oh my god,
Let me change this. Wait a minute.
skip past that. I don't know, nothing to see here. It's the woman in the snow. I thought this one was fine. Like, I do think it's pretty predictable, and if I have any criticism, I wish they hadn't cast the same actor or done some more, kind of makeup style thing. Just because it's.
Well,
it's
fascinating.
The minute the malevolent entity says "never tell,"
yeah, of course,
like,
of course, yeah.
I know where this is going.
What's interesting about that? So, spoilers. I mean, the story is a spoiler, but spoilers for the Tales from the Dark Side version. In the Tales from the Dark Side version, his initial sort of encounter is with an actual monster, like a gargoyle type creature. And so then he falls in love with a woman, tells the woman about it, all those years, and it's a really chilling scene. Because then, after he tells her the story, the actor turns around and looks at him and just screeches at him, "You swore! You swore you'd never tell!"
Wow.
And then, transforms into that thing, which is a very alarming moment. So it definitely, this is a much more understated rendition of that.
I do appreciate in this one that I liked the aspect that she has been moved by her lived experience with him and the raising of these children, and so spares him from this fate that she promised. That happened, right?
Oh yeah, no.
Okay, I mean
that is true. Yes,
there are moments of kind of fever dream. I don't know.
No, it's okay. So yeah, so then we get on. Unless you had more to say about the ye old woman in the snow, we get to the longest of the 4 stories, which is Hoichi the Earless. It opens up with this extended sequence of this ballad of a war that took place apparently centuries ago or many years ago between these 2 rival clans, and so he's
that was the struggle sequence. This one, yeah.
And I will say, as much as I love this film, and I do love it, that is the sequence that always sort of like, okay, yeah, I'm just sort of ready to get to the core story. Like, that ballad sets everything up, but it is a 25-minute sequence, and when you're already sort of even on the wavelength of the extended sort of patient time that it's taking, that sequence is a little bit of a struggle to get to because it's not your core story yet. It's almost kind of like an intermission version that's a preamble to the main story. But so the premise is that Hoichi is a blind priest, and he is so skilled at this instrument and at singing the song, the ballad of this story. He is beset one night, and he's blind, so does not realize it. He is taken by these spirits to go and perform that ballad for a host of basically these spirits, these ghost dead people, ghost pirate lepers, and so basically he's has a throwback.
But specifically, they are the winning side of that battle.
Yes,
the Heiki clan.
Yes,
and
the Heiki clan.
The Battle of Den Ura.
Yes, good job. Good job.
Yes.
So then his fellow priests are starting to wonder, like, where's he going at night? Why is he so tired? All of these other sort of things. They follow him, and when they follow him, that's actually the big reveal. Well, supposed big reveal. You know it automatically, but that's the reveal to them. Like, oh, you've been performing for a host of ghosts when he thought he was performing for an actual like royal assembly. Yeah. And so when they bring him back, they're like, you're in grave danger because now that you have, because he wasn't supposed to tell anybody about it. So now that this has been discovered, they're going to come after him. So what they do to protect him is they write on his skin, head to toe. They write, well, not quite, but we'll get there. They write the text of this. It's like a sacred text that they cover his body in, so that when the spirits come for him, he will be gone to them. He will be invisible to them. What his peer priests neglect to do is actually write the text on his ears. So when the spirits come, all they see are his ears. And so they have come to claim him, basically take his life, when they find his ears in a rather vicious, brutal scene. They rip his ears off. And he is...
Well, but now, you've seen it 15 times, but do you, and for me it was a bit of a just wild ride. I didn't comprehend that warrior spirit was there to do him harm, but just to return him again. You know what I mean? Like I thought, because the previous sort of visits, that specific warrior spirit came and beckoned him to the ghostly court, and so I thought this is just a repeat of that, but now he's the fellow priests have warned him of this. They've hidden him from you. Anyway, so but it was uniquely to dispatch with him.
Well, basically, what the head priest, who was that famous character actor I mentioned earlier, what the head priest is telling him is like, you've been basically like, if you continue to go back there, they will claim you. You will be possessed into the spirit world.
Okay, right.
And
He's like 7 days.
Right. I mean, it's funny because it's kind of like, it's one of those things where it's like, you can't keep going back there because if you do, you'll be lost forever.
Okay, I see that.
And so then when he comes, when the warrior spirit comes, then he's like, well, I was meant to come and to find the player and bring the player back. I can't find him. All I have are his ears, so I will get his ears and bring them back to basically show my master that, hey, I did what you asked me to do, but he wasn't there. All that was there was his ears. But Hoichi...
And then he's like, you hear me?
Yep, can y'all hear me? So Hoichi has been challenged by his fellow priests, and this is why that scene is so disturbing. He's been challenged by his peers to basically not utter a sound during that, like while he's there, because if he utters a sound, he will make the spirit aware of his presence there, and the spirit will then take all of him. What is so just disturbing and upsetting about that scene is while this spirit is wrestling his ears off of his head, he is trying desperately not to utter a sound while this terribly, terribly painful thing is happening to him. So it's pretty upsetting. But that story of any of the stories has what you would consider to be a quote unquote happy ending, because he survives the ordeal, becomes very famous. And what I love about that is that he becomes this person who like bears witness to what has taken place and sort of sings the legends of the people and becomes very popular and famous because of it. And so this is the only one of the four pieces that kind of has, like I said, a happy ending to it.
So the takeaway is get a tattoo.
Basically.
become famous. Well,
Basically.
do you care if I comment on Hoichi?
No, please, by all means.
So, what? I think if you could excise the Battle of Danaora filmed version, I do think, to me, this is the most interesting. Kind of overall, I think that actor who plays Hoichi is really strong. I think
he is,
the just kind of production design of the tattoo, the full body tattoo, is really compelling imagery.
Sure.
I think you've got the comic relief in those two other priests.
They're
You've
fun.
got, in fact, what I wrote is in all caps, badass emergence of the court assembly.
That's so
of
great.
the Heike clan when he's out there. And I just love, like, I don't know if it resonated with you, but the echoes of Kubo, the film.
Oh, absolutely.
The biwa instrument that Hoichi plays is exactly what Kubo plays in that film.
Absolutely.
Now, for all those positives, and I love the scene, like you just described, the scene of the ghost taking his ears, which even, again, doesn't feel like a malevolent act in the moment as much as it's just, here's some ears, let me take them back.
Right.
But the way that's shot, the way that's kind of presented is really exceptional. But this has been the first time in a long time in the middle of a movie I wanted to Google, like, go look at WebMD and be like, wait a minute. Can you have your ears taken from your head and then still hear?
Yeah. And
I really struggle with that one because I was like, oh man, that ain't right. This brother is going to be blind and deaf.
It's going to be so dark.
And which seems the natural sort of way this story would end, but nope.
Well, and you, did you Google it? Did you find out?
Nah, man. I just...
this movie's 3 hours long. I didn't do anything.
I gotta pause enough times to take notes, man.
Yeah, so you are able to hear only because your eardrum is so deep into your cranium, into
what?
the canal. Like, yeah, you are able to hear without your ears.
What?
I know.
Did you Google
no,
that?
I did not Google this, but I know this to be true because.
All right. No, I'm not challenging you. I'm genuinely curious. How on earth do you know that piece of arcane information?
Okay, because I've so often heard the story that when Vincent van Gogh was driven mad by inner ear problems, he thought he could rid himself of his inner ear problems by chopping off his ear and was obviously unsuccessful. It's because your eardrum is so deep into... I mean, I would imagine it would be more difficult to hear, but yes.
You are a good man. That is impressive. You have... Reed wins this episode of The Fear of God. Like, you did it. You just did it. I did not have the energy or care to actually hunt up that information, but I did think it. And look at you.
That is so funny. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. My only comments about that are I love the shots of Hoichi.
It's a long episode.
It is. We're getting there. We're getting there. I love the shots of Hoichi hearing the sounds of the warrior spirits like coming to him. But the concept of a blind man being beset by spirits just is fascinating to me.
Yeah, that's a great take.
And so I do agree with you. I love a lot about that particular story.
Well, even the Will o' the Wisps, the fire, sort of floating fire, and the gosh,
yeah. That's just There's so much to love about that story. So I'm gonna briefly describe the final story as a pivot into theme, and then we can wrap a bow on this and wind down. So the final story is called In a Cup of Tea, and it's fascinating to me that it opens up by saying, many of the stories that have been passed down to us from the generations are incomplete. They don't have endings, and I think it is so audacious and excellent that this story is incomplete. I know that sounds weird. It's brief, but it does not have a firm resolution to it, and I love that about it. I don't even fully know why. I mean, I have a theme thing that I've written down, but I just love the fact that it's like you're already asking a lot of your audience to put in 3 hours to sit and watch these 4 stories. But the fact that your 4th story is going to conclude incomplete, I just think that takes guts. I'm like, that is really, really strong. But the premise of it is there's this man who basically when he lifts up his cup of tea, he sees the image of a person in his cup of tea, and then he drinks it anyway. And then when he later goes and sees the like, he continues to pick up cups of tea, and then it feels as if the image is getting closer and closer to him, like the TV in the ring or something. So, but so what this then becomes is then he begins to see spirits like come to him and say, "You've done me harm." The image says to him, and then 3 other people come to him and say, "You've done our master harm, and our master is going to come and take revenge." So he tries to like do battle with these spirits and finds it somewhat difficult to actively do battle with these spirits. And what I found so compelling about this is that then the show, I'm going to have to get a little meta about this. In the film sets up that the story I just described to you was written down, and that it was written down incomplete. So then what you have is like a meta-narrative where a publisher visits the house of the person who was supposedly writing that story down, and that author has now disappeared, and they have left behind this very cryptic letter about a man swallowing another man's soul, which I found so arresting. I feel like the story is so ahead of its time with the idea of a meta-narrative, like getting outside of your own story. I don't know how much of that was around in 1964, but I don't think much of it. And then the concept, and this is what really drove me. There's 2 things that I had for theme that I'll write down, and we can unpack it for a moment, and then we can wind down this Kwaidan level episode.
Do you not care what I think of Cup of Tea?
I mean, you've pretty much said you don't like this movie, so I just
No, I absolutely did not say that.
No,
I was very intentional about not saying I don't like this movie.
Yes.
I have deep
what do you
respect
think
for this movie. I thought it was comedy gold. That man's face showing up in that man's tea. That was hysterical. I was like, I know they are not meaning this, but daggum, that's funny.
Because the look on his face, he's like
right
looking at him.
Right.
It's like, oh, honey, don't buy this tea. This tea's expired.
What did I eat for breakfast?
Oh my gosh. Shouldn't have had those eggs.
No, I just kept calling him Smiley in my notes. Oh, there's Smiley again.
Smiley. Oh my gosh, that's funny.
Hey, it's me.
Oh my gosh, that is hysterical.
You want to watch Godzilla?
Why don't you just give me Godzilla?
Come on, Reed. Sincerely, I don't not like this movie. Don't read that.
Okay, all right. Okay. No, I understand.
It's a lot. It's a lot. But I like it.
It's a lot. So, with the exception of the cup of tea story, which I think has something even more fascinating going on with it, all of the stories have to deal with some version of like broken vows. So, the samurai in the first one, he broke his vow to his first wife. The fisherman obviously broke his vow to the spirit that spared his life. Even though he is deceived into it, his promise, Hoichi's promise not to tell the truth about the sort of spirit assembly, he breaks that vow to them, again, accidentally. But so they all deal with this sort of idea of basically broken vows leading to decay, loss, destruction. But what I really found fascinating about this final story and how it sort of bleeds into the rest is, so I had mentioned that in the cup of tea story, there's this statement that they make about the idea of a man swallowing another man's soul. But here's the concept that I found really riveting. I'm going to say this exactly how I wrote it down, and then I can unpack it for a second if it's a bit obtuse. The concept of characters in our imagination having a unique life and power of their own is very captivating to me, particularly when we consider the imaginations we build about real people in our lives. And when we consider the ways that those real people in our lives, those real flesh and blood individuals, take on a sometimes different, sometimes happier, sometimes worse, sometimes completely distorted view inside our own imaginations. So this happens a lot when you are in a relationship with someone, you're in a situation where you're with somebody a lot, maybe at work, or you engage with somebody a lot. they begin to take on life in your own imagination, where you can imagine what they would say or do in certain scenarios. And particularly when conflict is introduced into those situations, then you begin to imagine ways in which they will react. That what is really psychologically interesting is you'll imagine, I'll use the subject of marriage because it's the easiest through line. You begin to imagine a fight or an argument or a disagreement with your spouse that then you sometimes accidentally hold them accountable for. Like you imagine a conflict in your mind that never took place. You just imagine it happened, and then you're irritable with your spouse when they've done nothing. They've done nothing except inside your own mind. And it fascinated me because then when you sort of spread that out through, you have the man who had in black hair who had broken his vow to his wife, but then he keeps seeing her. He keeps envisioning and imagining her. You have the fisherman who sees the vision of his new wife, and it reminds him of this specter that now lives solely in his imagination. And even with Hoichi the Earless and the idea of, even though he is blind, like this assembly holds a certain place in his imagination only because he's never seen them.
Right.
And so the ways in which each of these stories kind of begin to deal with the power of characters inside of our imagination really invigorated me. And I don't think that's it's certainly not exclusively, but I think that's part of something that I find very compelling about this film, is this notion of the distorted ways in which our own imaginations of people, real people in our lives, the way that those distortions can often produce decay, threat, danger, destruction, if we are not attentive. And I think I have said something akin to this on the pod before, but if we're not attentive to recognizing that dividing line between what is our imagination and what is the real and tangible flesh and blood reality that we have before us, then we have skewed narratives that take place in ourselves. You, Nathan, being a very big fan of, and I think your wife most especially is, but of Brene Brown, and in that special she talks about that Netflix special she has, The Call to Courage. She talks about the story we tell ourselves,
right?
And the idea of people populating narratives that live exclusively in our imagination, but then transmitting themselves into our reactions and assessments of the real is a really captivating and compelling idea to me. So I submit that to you as one of my major takeaways from Kwaidan. Your thoughts, Mr. Rouse?
I'm sorry, I fell asleep. I'm just kidding. No. I'm not going to have a ton of substance in response to what you're saying. I think your takeaway has a lot of intentional thoughtfulness to it that perhaps another viewing being able to pull on some of these threads.
Sure.
I mean, I'm with you. Like, just ignore my tomfoolery. Most people try to, but the cup of tea sort of notion of drinking the soul of another person, or kind of that level of disposability we exercise towards others in our minds and in our imagination is a powerful one and a cautionary one. I'm not so much at a loss for words, and I just don't have a ton to add to exactly what you said.
Sure,
as much as
sure.
I agree, Reed. You're a good man.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I actively want to kind of go to the fog meter, but just to explode this for just a brief moment, like this, the tendrils, the ripple effects of, and this would be my caution to our listeners, my invitation to your own thoughts, listeners, about the ways in which we, again, you create a person in your mind that is a version of the flesh and blood real human being you may know, or that you may know about, because it happens in politics, it happens with actors, it happens in all kinds of ways where we will populate our imaginations with, and we will assign them intentions, We will assign them conditions. We will
Right.
assign them scenarios and settings in which they live, which is part of what I love about like the clearly fabricated sort of settings of this film. And so like these characters, they populate these fictionalized places, and they travel through it, but we ourselves are the authors of these conditions and settings, and the ways in which, if we are not careful to recognize those as imaginative, then suddenly we will be convinced everybody's out to get us. We will be convinced of malevolence of people who may not even be considering anything of the things we have assigned to them. We will develop conspiracy theories inside our own relationships, and it has the potential, if unchecked and unguarded, to really be detrimental and destructive, as so many of these stories wind up being, detrimental and destructive to our own well-being, our wholeness, our happiness, our futures, and so I find it incredibly compelling. And one of the ways, and I will leave it with this, one of the ways that we can sort of beat back that notion is as maybe adopt a bit of a Kubo, if you will, or a Hoichi the Earless, and, sing the song, tell the story, like, make it something that we bear witness to, opening up about the goings-on in our own imagination so that we can have them challenged by what is real and tangible and active in front of us, so that it does not gain too much power only in our own hearts and minds and nowhere else.
You're gonna be mad at me because I'm not trying to tack on another 20 minutes of conversation here, but sometimes I'll rise to the occasion, and your talking right now is fueling my brain. It is interesting, despite having 3 years of Japanese as a foreign language in high school, I don't know that I would identify as having a great comprehension of their kind of lore as a culture. And it's fascinating. Generally speaking, as a persona, Japanese culture is very stoic, like
sure.
you have to polite, extremely polite, and it's interesting to me that Cup of Tea has the elements it has. And do you remember one of the entire threads of Kubo is about storytelling, about the stories we tell ourselves, and about the ability to live into an ending. And it's just interesting to me, kind of the correlative aspects of what's present in some of these Kwaidan stories, and that one, which again, I don't know enough about the origins of the film Kubo, but I imagine there was a lot. It was rooted in some pretty, kind of cultural touch points. Anyway, just interesting correlation there.
Yeah, and I think a lot to ponder there. For the sake of time, I think I would just we'll pivot into the fog meter, but I think your observations of the cultural significance of this can't be removed from a film like this. We've talked a lot in this particular series, and we'll close it down with next week, but part of why we did this series is to kind of look beyond our front door and look into windows of places that we will not be able to fully understand because it's not where we come from. And I think that's something that we can respect and admire greatly about films like this and about the ones that we've covered, and just take a pause and be more meditative in Kwaidan-esque fashion, if you will, about some of these thoughts and considerations. So with that having been said, you want to close us down and go into the fog meter?
Let's do it. So yes, every film we discuss, we do submit to the rigors of the fog meter, that of two specific metrics, one being fear, how scary a thing is, and God, or how substantive the piece of work is. On a scale of, I don't know if it's 0 to 10 or 1 to 10, I guess it's going to change depending on the conversation. But for Kwaidan, I am going to, on the fear aspect, land at a 3.
All right.
I think the stories being told are compelling stories with, once you kind of engage the aspects of them, some elements of kind of fearful responses to negligent action type thing. But as a film, it's not going to kind of scare you or terrify you.
Right. I'm with you on that. There are some shots that I find just so sort of haunting, maybe not nightmarish, but really, compelling visually. I'm going to go with a 6 for the fear measurement. For the God measurement or the substance within the film, I think the stories in their simplicity are sort of deceptively deep, but they're also, I think it would be false for me to say that they're after anything terribly complex. They are meant to be archetypal ghost stories. That's where they come from. That's what they are. So I'm going to give it a 7 for the God meter.
It's so funny to me. I thought on both of those you were prepping for hedging, and then you land at relatively strong ratings there. I'll just lead and then unpack. I'm gonna go with a 5. So I think there are things there. I think context of how you consume this film matters deeply to your ability to kind of really engage it. And so honestly, my 5 is a little bit of a hedge, just in the sense that I do think there are things there that I wasn't in the viewing of it equipped to kind of dial in on. And I wouldn't surprise me if a lot of these tales have deeper cultural resonance than my ability to kind of apprehend them. So.
Well, they were, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, they were adapted from traditional Japanese ghost stories. There was a collection.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and there was a collection, and I forget the author's name, but it was a collection from like the early 1900s of ghost stories that were adapted for it. So yeah, that wouldn't surprise me either. That brings us to a 5.25 on the fog meter for Kwaidan. And so I'll give you some moment to think about it. I obviously would highly recommend the film with the qualifier that it does require patience and it requires attentiveness and a wavelength for a slow meditative film that is lengthy. I would highly recommend it for cinephiles, for people who appreciate longer, more deliberately paced films like that. But what say you, Mr. Nathan Rouse?
I think if you are single or retired or have no have no children, I absolutely would recommend this. And even to people not in those categories, I would still measuredly recommend, just from the standpoint of the amount of context required. And I say this sincerely, like, this is not me being jokey. Like,
sure.
I do kind of wish I'd had the foresight, although in your defense, if you'd even told me a month ago to do it this way, it's possible it would have gone in one earless hole and out the other one. Though I would still be able to hear it, just not
right.
Kind of
That's true.
with my actual ears. I wish I had the foresight to just kind of consume them individually as stories over time, as opposed to trying to work it through in a 24-hour period.
Sure. All right. Well, that puts Kwaidan in the books, the penultimate episode of Phase 1 of #Speaking in Tongues. Next week, if you've been following along with the Netflix original series, Season 1 of Dark, then check out episodes 9 and 10 for our full episode on that.
That's
next
exciting.
Week. Nathan, thank you so much for enduring the 3 hours and the 4 stories of Kwaidan. Thank you for indulging me in this one of my very favorite films.
Sure, man.
And thank you, listeners, for hanging with us, either for the conversation or for the film or both. We hope you enjoyed either or both of those, and we will see you next week.
Sayonara! The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And you can continue the conversation in a variety of ways. You can follow us on Twitter @TheFearOfGod. You can like and follow us on Facebook or join the Facebook Fear of God discussion group. You can follow us on Instagram @FearOfGodPodcast. Go to morethanonelesson.com to leave a comment on this post or any of the other official episode posts. Email us at fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. Our theme music was composed by Lee Wright and Reed Lackey. Our podcast art was crafted by Jacob Hunt of jacobhuntcomics.com. Merchandise for the show can be found at tpublic.com. Just search The Fear of God Podcast, all one word. And last but not least, if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating or a review. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, everybody.